where it goes. Awesome.
Awesome. So the thing I want to talk about today is the O-span, which I've spent the last 2 weeks making.
Mhm.
Um, it's basically ready except for um, some of the styling of the feedback and then
Mhm.
some like the server-side processing of the data afterwards. But we can take a look at it, I think.
Mhm.
Should be fun. Let's see here. Um, okay, are you seeing my screen?
No, wait. Okay, something changed. I think I'm about to. Okay, there we go. It worked.
Okay, so you can see it now.
Yeah, here, I'm going to hit yours to say present to everyone. I forgot that we have that ability, but it is fantastic because if I hit present to everybody, it records that for the entire session. So
Oh,
we can keep
nice.
talking, but it won't switch it. It'll just stay on your screen. I just
Cool.
need to remember to turn it off because we had this with the first Hangouts where I presented you to everybody and then started talking about code and it would just showing you for the rest of the video. And it was just like you like programming some other trial type. Well, I'm like, you can see here, and you're just typing in the middle of some like long code block. Like, oh, this must look really confusing to people who did not recognize that that isn't the code I'm talking about. Like,
Well, I mean,
why is he not stopping his coding while he's explaining the code?
I don't know how many people are actually watching these videos, though.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, so I'll just start from the beginning. I actually set this up on the master version because it's sort of like this one-off that I expect everyone in my lab to just send people to one link, and I don't want them dealing with multiple experiments.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I've coded it, there's actually no PHP at all.
Oh, is it all happening in trial?
Yeah, it's all happening as JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
And so far there's no information that I'm going to feed through settings. And I don't even use like the collector initialize thing. I just say window on load because nothing is like time critical in the first 100 milliseconds. I don't care how things are happening. I just want them to happen. And when we transfer this over to dev, I think probably the only thing I'll need to change is just to see if there's new stylings on the body that I have to overwrite. Like right now I have content where I'm telling the form to be width 100% rather than 700 pixels or whatever it is, and no padding. Did we take that off in dev, or does the form still have padding?
We haven't taken it off, but we can.
All right, well,
I don't remember why I initially did make it 700 pixels. I know there are some trial types like would you like passage. If you don't want to make that 100% because that's not a nice reading experience, but I think most trial types are fine to default to 100%.
Okay. Yeah, this ended up being a lot longer than I thought it would be because I had made sort of a simplified O-span before, not a shortened one, but just simplified. And that was not nearly as long as this. This ended up being about 1,000 lines of code because I kept telling people like, "Oh yeah, it'll be ready tomorrow. Need one more day. Need one more day." And it's like this took me a week and a half. Although a lot of it was reading the Inquisit scripts to really get the fine details down.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't like code. It's more like it's meant to be used through a GUI like you do with ePrime. So, I mean, I think it is meant to be coded, but there's a lot of stuff here that's clearly... It looks like it was meant for a GUI sort of a structure because, you know, it's not sort of like this linear code-like thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, let's see, let's get started. So we get some instructions. They click through. It starts with some practice letters.
Do you have to use it on screen, or can you hit keys?
So the instructions said that we're just doing things through mouse clicks. So right now I just have it doing mouse clicks. It's not too hard to make the events because I can just say like document on key press if they've clicked the key. Like everything that's a button in this has a class on it called O-span button.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I just put like, you know,
when you click
key
the O-span button, get its inner HTML or .html.
Yeah, and then I can say document on key press if you match any of the visible buttons on screen, click that button. So it's not too hard to do. And then I sort of made it so that it should fit nicely, even if you load up as like a, like if you're looking on it through a mobile device, it should still fit. Mm-hmm. So I generally tried to make things small, which looks like it has a lot of wasted space, but like in the normal task, like the grid is like kind of spread out here, and like the clear button's bottom left and the X button's bottom right. But I figured I'll just shrink everything, and that way almost everybody's going to have the same look to things, because of how like click sensitive this is. Like I didn't want someone who's like trying to scroll through with a click and then they accidentally move the instructions forward. So I just kind of tried to keep things consistent.
Have you looked at this on a phone?
I haven't, other than just using like responsive mode.
Thing. Okay, yeah. Well, that's good. So the reason that stuff works better, it used to not work really well, is that there was like it's in the header somewhere, but there's like a property you put on it that basically says, hey, if you're on a mobile phone, don't try to treat this as a pixel for pixel recreation. What's it called? Oh, it's this line 5, meta name viewport, or meta name equals viewport, content equals width equals device width. Initial scale 1. It's a thing I found on Google. It's supposed to make pages more mobile friendly, but essentially when you give them that little like property, the phone knows, okay, I can kind of screw with this. Like it says 100 pixels wide, but my pixels are tiny. So wherever it is 100, make it 400. So it won't look tiny, just by pixel count on screen anymore. It should sort of scale to look about right on a phone.
All right, that's cool. Yeah, it gets weird if you have like only 150 pixels.
Yeah, but at that point, anything you're gonna do is gonna be weird.
Yeah,
you're a weird person if you have 150 pixel widescreen.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully most people are just doing this on a computer, so not as much of a problem.
Yeah, and we have that data now too, so that's nice.
And then this just like, a weird optical illusion, but you know how those experiments where you stare at like a screen that's green and then you look at a white screen and instead you see the inverse color?
Yeah.
So I was like, if I'm holding my mouse over this, once I've clicked the number of letters that are equal to the entire span length, the letters gray out and I'm not allowed to click any of them anymore. And what it seems like is these ones that are white when I'm not hovering over them look darker than this one. So it's just like click it, and it looks like this is light gray and these are all dark gray. Did you notice that? Here, I'll do it again. So it's like you let if you're staring at the P for a second, and then suddenly that P looks light gray, and then it's just like I thought there was something wrong with my code for a long time, and I was like, why is that happening? What is this weird hover property that?
That is what's the name of that thing? I mean, it's basically
it's habituation, right?
Yeah, you get habituated, but the other was the color opposition. Like the colors are generally in rivalry, like red and cyan.
Yeah.
If you stare at cyan and then take it away and show gray, you see red. Because sort of red is perceived as like the opposite of cyan, or I guess the absence of cyan makes red. So when you just leave cyan on screen, in essence, like the cyan receptor gets weaker, and then when you show a neutral image, it sees an uneven balance of you're getting less cyan than red, so perceived redness. Because this solid input is now we're like down regulating the cyan.
Yeah, so
is that Adam? I hear bubbles. I don't know, it's not Adam.
Yeah, I don't see anyone connecting.
Yeah, that is kind of weird. I wonder if you can just change all their colors. Oh no, that wouldn't solve it either.
I mean, the illusion doesn't matter. I just thought it was interesting because I mean, as soon as you look at another letter to compare the gray, then it goes away. But
it's funny for a second you do go like, what the hell just happened? Like, why is this one? Does it want me to do something with the highlighted one? And you look around and it's not highlighted anymore.
Yeah,
might have a sense like I missed my window. Oh, they get feedback per trial.
Yeah, per span. So yeah, first we just practice the letters, and then after that we'll practice the math. And then what it's actually doing here is you have as much time as you want to solve the math problem, but I'm actually timing it. So right now I'm solving it, and as soon as I solve it, I'm supposed to click. So I'm like, okay, this is 3. So I click it, and it actually recorded how long it took for me to decide that I'd solved it. And I do 15 of these. and it's actually just going to use this as a measurement of how much time to give me on later trials.
Mm-hmm.
So then after I do this, it takes the average time plus 2.5 standard deviations. And then that's the max time I have to solve future math problems.
Oh, nice.
And then so I was like worried about how could I possibly test that reliably.
Mm-hmm.
So what I had it do is for a little while on every one of these trials, I would have it automatically submit after like half a second or a second and a half. And then I just like, is the final calculation, since deviation is going to be 0, is it going to be a second and a half or whatever I did? And it did. It said the timeout was exactly 500 milliseconds. And I was like, yes, it works.
Yeah, so 2.5 standard deviations will get about 99% of your cases.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, in the paper, they just said that they came to that number 2.5 through lots and lots of pilot testing. So, I mean, I guess they just piloted it until it worked.
Well, even just statistically, if you know that, okay, here's your population, if you know what the average score is and you know the standard deviation, then if you cut the upper bound is 2.5 standard deviations above, that should get about 99% of all observations will be less than 2.5 standard deviations above that point.
Yeah, but I mean, if that's true, if you already are capturing 99%, then it seems like I wouldn't feel rushed. Like if someone said that, okay, it takes you about 10 seconds to solve this, and the slowest you ever were was about 15 seconds. So I'll give you 16 seconds to solve these problems, and I'm never ever going to feel rushed. It's like, okay, that's almost twice as much time as I need. So I don't know. Maybe it's like after you've done 100, if you get bored, then you'll notice it'll skip forward, and or maybe it's just the thread that there is some time limit that we're not going to tell you. So just solve it as fast as you can.
And it's somehow dependent on you.
Yeah,
we made a time limit for you, so work as hard as you can.
And it actually does tell them that we computed the average time. And it doesn't actually say that you get your average time plus 2.5 deviations. It just says if you take longer than your average time. But if I look up my math time limit, I have 17 seconds to solve these problems because I was talking with you while I was doing them.
Oh, I wonder if we should tell people this, because then, like, right, people are used to the way I'm thinking of like MTurk surveys, where they get used to, okay, when I get asked this thing, these are all the answers, or they just generally learn the nature of the tasks. And if we tell them that, hey, if you go really slow on these math problems, then you get more time on the later math problems. Like, they just know there's a relationship between those two facts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still not really concerned with the timeouts just because it is so long, and these math problems are pretty easy. It's not like I was doing exceptionally easy ones and then they get harder later. It's about the same amount of difficulty that they should expect. So, I mean, I guess the part where difficulty comes in later is when I was doing these math problems, they were all that I was thinking about. But in the later tasks, I'm trying to keep in a span of letters in my head. So I'm going like QFP, QFP, QFP. Okay, the answer is 17. QFP, QFP, QFPT, QFPT. So that's going to slow people down, admittedly. One thing, I mean, on the topic of sharing this with MTurk, so the problem is that those practice problems are fixed. Everything else is randomized, but since they piloted it with a fixed set, like they explicitly said, we're not randomizing the practice math problems. So I figured that that's safe, because if I randomize a group and they happen to get really easy ones, like they were getting all of the 4 divided by 1 and 3 times 1 questions, then they would have a really low time limit and it would look like they're getting a lot more wrong. And then if you get less than 85% accuracy on the math, your OSPAN data is discounted. It's like you considered failed the task.
You failed to have a span. You failed to have a span.
Yeah, because the rules are do the math as fast as you can while keeping your accuracy above 85%. So if you were not, so basically, if you weren't doing that on the math section, like you weren't going fast enough or accurate enough, then you can't say that you were really testing working memory, because you could have been just ignoring the math and just going, okay, A, B, F, A, B, F, A, B, F, and just clicking true every time on the math. So it's, I mean, it's a fair check saying that, okay, yeah, we can't actually say that you were spending enough attention on the math problems.
Yeah, so it's like you need to be able to get this measure is only valid when you get these sequences of strings while doing math. And if
Mhm.
you're not successfully doing math, then we haven't successfully measured how well you do these strings.
Which it is kind of funny because it's not like you get partial data out of it. You don't throw out a couple trials. You throw out 20 minutes of data if they don't end up with 85% accuracy.
Ouch.
Yeah, that's kind of a bummer. Um, so then after this, we do like a practice combined one.
And so getting back to actually the thing I was mentioning to you yesterday about the kind of filters people would want, this would actually be the nice kind of thing where I could imagine you say run this thing and you become eligible for all these other studies. Then people who want to do those studies can be like, we want people with an O span of this to this, and then people in a second group from here to here.
Yeah, although you would imagine some circumstances is going to change their O span, like if with Caro's thing with ego depletion, which ultimately didn't turn out, so maybe not that. But
Yeah.
there are going to be some people like stereotype threat, and then you're going to expect a reduced O span.
Yeah.
So I tanked that. I got 0 correct on everything, which is like seems statistically unlikely because I was just saying true.
Yeah.
But it's also possible that I'm not measuring. Like I was just working on feedback like this morning for a half hour, so it might actually just not be running correctly.
Well, see, try to get them right. 5.
Yeah. All right. So I trust my math. I now that I'm actually looking at the problems, I should be getting these correct. Oh man, this is a 5 span. I just know it ends with Q. Oh, by the way, so there's this thing here where if you don't know, you're supposed to put a blank in it, right? But by default, like if you put 2 blanks next to each other, it kind of looks like one really long underscore. There's this CSS property. Let me look at my styles here. Letter, here we go. Letter spacing. I didn't know you could do that. Like I thought that was sort of built into the fonts.
You can do kerning?
Yeah, you can. So you could actually put this. I don't wonder if you could do a negative value on this, but
Can I put
yeah.
spans around every character and have different kerning on every character?
Well, so I mean, that's the thing is, I don't have to do spans around everything. This just says take the actual letters and current them because like that's what I thought I was going to
so you
have
can
to
do it
do.
on a whole container.
Yeah, like I thought I was going to have to put spans around each of these characters, but if I look at it, you know, I just have these 2 characters in there, which they're getting appended, but there's just white space in between. I'm not wrapping each one in a span.
I wonder what cases we can use that. I feel like there are some cases where we kind of want the input more like this, like spaces between the letters.
I mean, usually we're doing words, which are normally fine. It's just in this particular case, I wanted the underscores to not run together, and that I thought it was going to be a bit of work, and it turned out to be no work at all. So, plus, this wasn't even a CSS3 thing. This was like CSS1.
Oh, is it just one of those old CSS things that people don't talk about? It's like,
yeah, because no one needs it most of the time.
Yeah, that's good that you found that though. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I was thinking you were basically wrapping all the letters in spans and spacing them out.
Yeah. All right. So it looks like my math isn't working, but that's fine because I was just working on that code this morning. Like I haven't tested it at all, and it got to be like all of the data of this is all over the place. So I think it makes sense that I have to do a bit of bug checking because the code got fairly complicated. I have it organized, I think, in a way that lets me understand the task. Because basically there's 4 phases. There's practice letters, practice math, practice both, and then the actual task. And each of those phases comes with instructions first. So at the top I have settings. Like these are things that you could actually customize the experiment. Like if you wanted to use different letters, if you wanted to change the practice letters or the practice math problems, here's the actual spans. And then to make the short version of this, all I have to do is cut out the 3s and the 7s and 1 each of the other ones. And so that's how I turn it from a 20-minute into a 10-minute task.
Wait, you cut out the what?
Like to make the shortened O span, you just cut out the 3 spans and the 7 spans, and then you only do 2 each of 4, 5, and 6. And so that cuts the O span time in half. So like what I'm gonna do is when I'm finished with OSPAN, I'm gonna like copy paste the trial type, rename it OSPAN short, and do exactly that, because that way in the procedure file you just type in OSPAN short rather than going into settings. Actually, this should be 85. So yeah, I have this area here, which sort of like init eventually says, okay, do begin initial instructions, and then when instructions are on the screen, every time you click, you're gonna get like respond to click on the body, and it says, okay, if you're in one of the instructions phases, advance the current instructions. And then this one will say, if you've reached the last like instructions div, because each of the instruction containers looks like this, where you've got divs that have class instructions, and only one of these is shown at a time. So if I actually reset the task, so here, like these are just the various divs, and they always end with this click the mouse to continue, which I guess I could have actually made that a CSS property, just saying that this after says click the mouse to continue. But they all have a consistent format here, so then instructions all gets handled. And once I reach the end of that block, it says, okay, well, depending on the phase you are, run the end that instructions thing. And that one just says, okay, well, if I just finish the starting instructions, do the practice letter. And then basically what each of these is doing is just saying, okay, well, I want to get into the point where I'm running spans. So I have these functions, and these are all for how I actually run spans, like start current span, and a current trial inside a span is like a letter math problem pair. So then start the math problem, end the math problem, start them solving the math problem. Here's like how you record their math response, like whether they click true, false, show the letter, stop showing the letter, go to the next trial, but if we're out of trials, go ahead and start the recall test. Then when they've submitted the recall test, do some stuff, give feedback if they've reached the end of the span, go to this one, which records the data somewhere, and then that's this function here. And then finally, it just says end. If like basically we have more spans, like if we're doing the practice letters, for example, that's 3 spans of 2. So after I've done the 2 trials, I do the recall test, and then after each span, I get to this point where it's like, okay, where I've done all 3 in the current group, which is defined up here. Like practice letters is a span of 2, 2, 3, and then 3. And if I've reached the end of that block, run this thing that says end. So it's kind of interesting that I've got like this looping structure here that's sort of getting tied into this looping structure here. Like this says for each phase, go through this process of running the entire group. And what's kind of funny is I've shoehorned everything to sort of fit this. So for example, when we start out, I'm only showing letters, like I'm skipping the math. And basically, I have the code say, okay, for this practice letters area, set all the math problems to null. And then when I'm going through the task, it says, if math is null, then skip it and go straight to the letter. Like when I have start current trial, it says, if math is null, then just go to the letter instead. And then the same thing on the other one, when I'm doing just the math problems, if letter is set to null, then just go to advanced trial. So it's kind of funny because when I was writing it, I thought that this was awful because I was like, oh, I just want to do math problems. Why am I trying to fit it into this structure of showing letters and doing recall tests and giving feedback when all of that's irrelevant for this section? But actually it ended up being really helpful. The fact that every single group runs through this code meant that really I just have to go like, okay, set up the stimuli for practice letters where all the math thing is set to null, and then go do the task. Then for math, it was like, okay, set up everything so that the letters are set to null, and then go do the math stuff. And then the logic of this part knows to skip stuff. But that means that if, for example,
you make one big loop and pieces are on or off depending on which version of the loop you're in.
Yeah. So
that's really nice, because then you can keep one structure that you're just like, well, turn off 5 of these dials and then do it. Turn off the other, turn those dials back on and turn some other dials off and keep doing it.
Yeah, so lots of these things just have like little checks inside them that says, oh, for this type of it, should I be doing this? Like
it's like you can basically skip my section. Like, hey, if this flag is null, skip this section, go to the next one. Then that section will check as well. Like, okay, if this flag is null, do this.
Yeah, so like even like the feedback section is like, if I have math that's not empty, then start giving some math feedback. Or in the make math, let's see, start math solve. Yeah, it'll say something like, where is it? No, start math here. So it says, if math time limit is not null, then, impose the time limit. But, that's not present during the math practice because that's when I'm actually creating the math time limit. So yeah, just a lot of shoehorning everything into a common structure. It felt clunky at the beginning, but then the end result was pretty nice because it meant that if it worked at the beginning, then I'm really confident that it'll work later.
Because you're not like, well, I keep tweaking the same things and new versions of it happen. You're like, no, I'm going through the same structure. Just a flag is either null or not null, and that will determine what happens.
Yeah, and then if I wanted to change something so that, for example, like the math timing is different. I only have to change the timing in one spot, or the CSS styling. It's always going to be exactly the same for these different phases, and then just the phases are like, okay, set the alias of current span group to either my practice math or my practice letters or practice both or real task, and then just run. And the nice thing about working with objects in JavaScript is that aliasing is just it's just a matter of saying that, okay, current group is equal to this group. So like if we look at where, let's see, so here is start. Here's where I'm starting the math. So I just say, okay, well the current phase is this string, so that later I can know, like this gets recorded into the data. But then it just says, okay, the current span group is just the practice math span group. And then I just have to reference this, and it'll be pulling from this really easily, but then I can just keep on resetting that every time I go through a new span. So it just ended up being really easy to work with this object just by sort of filling in, what's the current group? Okay, run with that. What's the current group? Okay, run with that. So I mean, it still feels somehow more complicated than it should be.
But this also seems like the kind of thing that like decision tree basically would capture almost all this, right? You're like, do this function, and then depending on, if this flag is left or one way, you go left. If it's another way, you go right.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of map out the whole space.
Yeah.
Although that'd be the kind of thing that I'd probably tell you to just like doodle down on a piece of paper, and then we can give to RA to make this in draw.io.
Yeah.
Like, make this look nice, but this is the flow from what we understand. Mm-hmm. And just like verify for yourself that this flow matches what the code says.
Yeah, and just one thing, from doing OSPAN, making different versions of it, it seemed like anything that's going to try and take this JavaScript approach of making a bunch of trials that sort of combine into one, the important thing is that for every step, it sort of knows how to reset itself, and it knows how to like clear itself off the screen. So for example, when I want to start, well, let's actually look at the loop here. So if I say start a math problem, like it knows like, okay, get the math problem, format it into HTML, put that on the screen, and then show it. And when I end the math problem, it just says, okay, well, whatever I was showing the math problem in, hide it, and then go to the next step. Like, it's not the responsibility of the next step to hide the previous step. I just have like a start and end, and the end thing says go to the next part. And so that seemed pretty helpful. That
where are you hiding it? Show me that again.
So like the part of the where I show like where the math problem shows up on the screen, where it says like 1 divided by 1 plus 1 is equal to question mark. Click the mouse when you want to continue. Basically, when I start, I have one function, start math, which looks at the current span and the current trial in the span, pulls out the math problem, formats that into HTML, loads that HTML into the math div, and then shows that. And then once they're done, whether they click to say that they've solved it or they run out of time, I run end math problem, which just basically hides that and then records the duration they spent solving it. And then that goes to the next one. So rather than making like, I could have combined end math with start math solve, which is the part that says, okay, is it 3, true or false? But it seemed handy to have like to group things into, this is how I want to start this section, and this is how I get out of this section, like whether it's, hiding everything, recording the duration. It seemed that even though these two things are happening at exactly the same time, breaking them up was pretty helpful.
It's more clear on where I'm supposed to look. Like if there's a problem when it's trying to, it won't advance to the next one. I would probably look at in math problem to say like, well, something's not working here.
Yeah. Or yeah.
If I want to modify the way it ends, it's more obvious that's where I'm going. Like, okay, when I hit the submit button, I want to calculate something new. I've given points to each letter for some strange reason, and now I need to calculate a score based on the letters you selected.
Yeah.
And that could happen there.
And another thing is having each of these, like events that are showing up on the screen totally responsible for their own content was kind of helpful in the sense that like I don't have to, right at the beginning of, start current span, I don't have to go through resetting everything because I'm like, oh, I don't want the old feedback to show up, so I have to go clear out the old feedback. I can actually let the start feedback area know what it needs to wipe clean and know what it needs to hide or refresh. So making this responsible for showing up correctly every time, it's helpful in that I only have to think about feedback when I'm actually looking at the feedback stuff, and I don't have to worry about, in the looping structure, what do I need to take care of? It's just a matter of like, no, when I want to start a current span, I just, I increment the current trial number, and then I just say, okay, go again, and everybody knows how to do their own thing well. So that's basically ready. I mean, I just have to fix that feedback problem, and then, so the next problem after that is then I have to throw all the data back to PHP, and I think I mentioned to you before, but I was getting...
The size limit?
No, so that one, size limit happened because I was recording data in a really inefficient way. Like what I was, in the time where I ran out of data, what I was doing is, like if I had something that looked like this, I mean the code would have looked something like form append, and then it would have looked like this. Oops. I should color code this one.
Yeah, it's so hard to code not in color once you're used to like your color to have a meaning to you. Then no matter what you write, if it's in black and white, you're like, that looks wrong.
So this was how I was doing it before. Like basically on every trial, I was appending inputs in this really long form, which is like, I'm having like 40 or 50 characters just to say, add another, 1 or a 0 to mark this trial as correct. Yeah. The new structure, which I always do now, which is way better and has given me no problems, is during the entire trial, I don't actually record it into inputs. I record it locally into some object that just says like my response array or something. And then this is getting filled with trial data. Yeah. And then at the end, I just do something like,
just comma separates everything.
So then this way, I end up with like an input that ends up looking like, let's see, can I exit out a script in here? I'll just make the language HTML. And then, so it's easier because then it'll be like input name is equal to all responses. And so basically every input is only adding 2 bytes of data, which is totally fine. So recording it this way means that I don't run out of data like I was, because this way was just, I mean, it worked if I only had like 50 trials, but I had, for every trial, I was recording like 13 different things. So like every trial was adding, like 400 or 500 bytes of information. So I couldn't have 250 trials of that.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah. So I mean, really, it seems like you could take this entire thing and just JSON encode it and dump it all as one input, and that'll save some space. Although JSON codes aren't the most efficient. Like, considering I know that there's no commas between values, and then there's going to be no pipe characters between trials, that's probably what I'm going to end up doing. Where I'll be like, okay, well, this trial has all these values, pipe to the next trial, and then PHP I'll split it up. But that should help. So yeah, with this.
Thinking about the future stuff, because I've had this thought too. I remember the first time you mentioned to me that we hit basically transfer limits on inputs.
Mm-hmm.
If in the future we've talked about that we're eventually going to end up on JavaScript, it would be nice to write some sort of response, like basically an AJAX sender for responses that we send responses to. Like, okay, here's a response that's now ready to be recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And that thing handles interacting with the server through AJAX calls of, okay, try to record trial 10. And then wait for confirmation from the server to reply. Like 10 is done, you can clear it out of your queue of things that need to be submitted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And then
I
when the
basically
experiment's
made
done,
that.
it can just queue up. Like, okay, well, we're waiting for these other 5 to be submitted in.
I mean, that's what I did when I had, template, which is like my collector ripoff, which basically did that. It would queue up trials, and it would make sure it got back a success message. And if it didn't, it would just try resubmitting, in case you lost your net for a couple minutes or something. But it's also what was the other program that I did?
Conductor?
Yeah, where do I have that? I might not have it on this. Like, I have it on the Git repo, but I might not have a local branch. So let's see. Well, I mean, basically, I did something like that where you just AJAX the data, and it would actually say there's a setting in Conductor where it would say how many trials do you want to combine into each of your responses, because every AJAX call is gonna have some overhead, and I didn't want to be for every single study for 1 second AJAXing back to the server, because it kind of defeats the purpose of taking the load off the server.
Yeah, you could essentially just be like, queue up until I've got like 30 bytes of stuff, and then send.
Yeah, and then send all of I think I would do something like that, where you would just say, okay, we'll group these trials, and maybe JavaScript side you can just measure, how much data do I have? When I have this amount, that's probably a good amount. Save my progress, or also save it by time limit. Like if it's been longer than a minute since I've saved data, save the data now.
Yeah, if you have minute-old data, just start sending.
Yeah, so there are things like that we can do if we switch to JavaScript. It's not hard to do. The important thing is just make sure you get back confirmation that it's saved, and then if it did, that's great.
Yeah, it's basically like, okay, well, you're out of the line of things that need to be submitted. I sent you. The server says I've got it. Throw it out. And then we wouldn't have to necessarily...
I mean, you don't even have to throw it out, because if you're giving feedback and stuff, there's no reason to ask for it back. But just for the sake of, like, in case they lose the experiment halfway through and I want to just see what data I had up until that point, in case they accidentally refresh the screen or whatever reason. Because like that's one thing that can happen in OSPAN is if they refresh the screen, they're going to start from the beginning, like completely beginning, and that kind of sucks. Especially because it kind of invalidates their data because they're going to be doing the practice math twice.
Which will go faster on, which will change the time limit for the other stuff.
Yeah. So probably we should have like a refresh counter.
Yeah, how were you doing that before? I know you told me you'd done it before.
Yeah, it's not hard. Just at the top of experiment.php, you just have an array that says like number of times that I've loaded current position. So if current position and post number is like 24.2, it's like, oh, I've never loaded this before. This is the first time. Oh, I've loaded this before. This must be a refresh. So you just have like a running counter of how many times have I tried to load this trial.
So you can even have an array of like, okay, the key is the trial number, and then its value is incremented every time it's loaded.
Yep, and that's how you do it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. And I mean, most of the time you don't even see it happening, but for trials like OSPAN or any of the other JavaScript trials that I've built, it's probably important. So we'd probably want that as like an automatic feature. Oh, by the way, this focus
I see the focus ticking down. I remember that bothered you.
Yeah, we should move this into the same thing that we're doing with all these other, like, don't write it onto the DOM until we're submitting the form. Yeah, so once I have this done, I'm hoping the RAs can test it. But aside from the feedback, which I was just writing this morning and haven't had a chance to work on, I've been testing all the other stuff, and it seems to be working. The last issue is once I submit it to the server, it's not so much the transfer of data, is that once the data is at the server, recording to a file is difficult. So I told you about how VDR Free Recall was struggling to record 100 lines at once.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think what I'm going to do in the short term is have OSPAN. I'm actually going to like open the output file and do it myself. Because, I mean, since I wrote array to line, I know how it works. And I'm just going to skip the encoding step because nothing in this data has non-UTF-8 or non-ASCII data, so it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But once Adam has his new experiment class, I'll check through and see if we can record chunks of data. Because there are plenty of situations where you want to record more than one line of data. And the fact that it can break after recording 20 minutes of data into 200 lines,
that's bad.
Is like, yeah, not a good limit to have. So
yeah, I agree too. It seems like a common function, especially for trials where you're like your free recall, where it's scoring a bunch of stuff. It's like, yeah, I want to see an aggregated score, but I also want a line for every single word they put down, and then I want to see which word it was compared to successfully, or the fact that, okay, we compared it against this set of words and didn't find a match on any of them.
Yeah, so that's what I record with VDR Free Recall, and it normally works with 20 words. I can't remember the situation that I was trying to record 100 lines, but I think it was for one of Sharon's experiments again. And
Sharon's always got these crazy designs.
Yeah. The point, I mean, with Sharon, the thing is, her professors that she works with will tell her that they want this certain design, and it's like copying from copying from some E prime task, or just they thought of it, and then she'll come to me with it, and then I'm like, well, this seems unnecessarily complicated. Can we simplify it this way? And then she's like, I don't think so. And I'm like, well, ask your professors. And then the next day she comes back, yeah, no, they said just try and make it work the way that they said the first time. I'm like, ah. So she works with people that are not willing to compromise. I mean, science shouldn't compromise, but this is like...
But also it shouldn't make arbitrary decisions and stick to them.
Yeah, that's what I think. Is like, I don't see how this contributes, and... Yeah, I mean, they know more than me, but I know more programming than them, so...
Yeah, I have that case a lot of time with people where I'm like, do you have to do it exactly? Like, the way you're describing is possible, but it's a lot more work. And is it meaningful that it goes exactly like this? Like, couldn't we break it up into do this, then I give you some instructions, and you do a different version? Where sometimes people are like, why want it? And like, it pops up a message on screen that says this, and then another thing happens. Like, that sounds like a lot of JavaScript, and I don't want to do that. So why don't we make it, you do this, give me an instruct, then you do the thing I instructed you to do. Then we give another instruct to tell you what it was. It's like, yeah, that's much simpler than making this interactive. Like, when they click 2, I want this to happen, and I want the background to turn red because they did it. I'm like, well, they just did it to alert you to something, right? Couldn't we just make it go away and then alert you to that thing?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I guess. Like, okay, do it that way because I'm not going to program more stuff.
Although it's harder for me to make that argument because...
Yeah, it's harder for you because it's your job. For me, I'm just like, well, this tool exists as is. And
even when it's not my job, like it's for another lab that's not paying me, it still seems like, it's like, well, what is this guy who's just an RA doing questioning my design? And it's like, no, I mean, it's your experiment, but
what are you doing not making your own experiments? I'm out.
Yeah.
How you like that, Apple? This game goes both ways.
I mean, they're nice about it. It's like, I actually feel bad making them redo their design to fit my needs when it's like, well, I mean, this is your job to come up with the best design, and I don't want to be the one shooting down your ideas because it's hard for me.
But I would also add that it is their job to make it too.
Yeah. Okay,
so I'm looking at... So the focus check thing you mentioned, that I should be able to fix like this minute.
Cool.
Okay, so 204 goes away, the line that says put it into there. And instead, I'm just going to write a focus end function that does. Actually, I
Wait,
don't even need a
can you
focus
share
end.
your screen? I want to look at the code that you're looking at.
Oh yeah, okay. So how do I share screen?
And then I guess switch it so that you're presenting so that people aren't staring at.
Oh yeah,
at
good
me.
call. Present to everyone, sure. Yeah, so I'm just looking at this. So this is the function. It's in the whoa. Where did it go? Oh god, how did I lose it? I always forget what it's called. There it is.
Oh, this is a side note. I don't know if it's important, but JavaScript doesn't come with like an array shuffle thing.
Mm-hmm.
So every time I just look it up on Stack Overflow and it's like super easy to get. But you may as well just put it in the collector and just have a collector shuffle because it's weird that I keep on looking it up and citing the person and all that.
Yeah, I think using like we have other stuff, right? Like that we're preventing backspace key. I just take those right off Stack Overflow and just put a link to like, hey, this is the place I found it. But
Or force numeric, or I just saw you scroll through my like
yeah,
focus without scrolling and
yeah. So this is numeric stuff. This again, I think was all from online.
mm-hmm.
But okay. So here's all that we need to do. So what I'm doing is I just init with
Although actually
that
that is
zero.
numeric. That's actually jQuery. Like jQuery comes with that is numeric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's I just start with the number of checks is 0, the number of counts is 0,
Mm-hmm.
and then all I'm doing is making a proportion. So every time I run
Yeah.
this, so here's the function. I just say, well, we've checked once, or we've checked again. If document has focus, then we counted a focus. This is the proportion of basically how many counts versus how many checks. So if these two equal each other, we get a number that's 1. If the number of focuses is less than the number of, or the number of times we were in focus is less than the number of times we were checked, we get the proportion of times that we counted us in focus and we have checked that we're in focus. So there's 100 checks and 98 counts, we get 98 divided by 100.
That's interesting. So this sort of makes it seem like this entire function. Sorry, this function in the sense like the experiment init, like collector experiment init, has to constantly be active so that it can keep on focus checking. I didn't know that you could do that. Like I thought that you had to tie focus check into the collector rather than just saying define it locally and then just keep running it locally.
Yeah, I just define the variables outside the scope of the function, and the function is just modifying these variables.
That's
So the
interesting.
only thing I should need to change is I take this line out,
Yeah.
which is the one that puts it in,
Uh-huh.
and then so I can either write a focus end, or I can just copy that line to right wherever we're submitting.
Yeah, I would do that. I would just
Just like pull basically whatever we've got at this point, give it to me.
mm-hmm.
Which is where's our keyboards? Where's our submit stuff? So here's trial begin.
Oh,
Actually,
cool. Trial begins in there.
give me like 3 minutes here. I'll be right back. I gotta take the dog out. But yeah, look through the code too, because I'm gonna
Yep.
try to find it on my phone while I'm out there.
Mhm.
Oh.
Hey.
Okay,
So
so where is
the
this
form
happening?
submit stuff is happening around line 125.
125. Okay, so it's not even in the experiment. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, just in common.
So there we go. We are now fixed.
Oh, well, the only thing is
Actually, wait.
that function doesn't know what focus prop or focus percentage is. So what I would do is
Wait, you
inside.
can't call like a. So the scope of focus check doesn't know about them either. Like I'm literally just using the variable names. But will
Well,
that not have access to the init function, to the vars from init?
it should. So since that function is inside of init, it should have everything inside init available inside focus check.
Okay.
But I'm saying that the function up on line 125 is not at all. I mean, this is inside common init, which is totally unrelated. So what I would do is, let me just share my screen again. All right, is this, am I,
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever picked the right monitor. If this is,
Yeah, I've had that too where I'm explaining stuff and you're like, we're just seeing your background. Like, oh,
yeah.
god damn it.
Okay, so if we look here, what we could do is, well, here, if we're looking at the focus area, instead of doing this, we could just say collector focus value is equal to focus prep.
Oh, and then you choose focus value.
Yeah, so this ties it into a scope that's consistent, and then here you would. I think you would do that. Let me double check the JavaScript.
Yeah, you have much more familiarity with JavaScript scope than I do.
Let's see. Yeah, undefined. Okay, so that should work. So that's normally my strategy for when I want information available across different functions. Actually, what I do really commonly
Wait,
in
so
all
you
of,
can do that collector dot and then just make up an arbitrary variable and it will store as a property of collector?
yep, you can store function. I mean, that's actually exactly what I'm doing when I say something like that's literally what I'm doing is I'm creating this entry in the collector and I'm setting its value to function. So yeah, you can do that.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. One thing that I do quite often when I set up these things is like, so this whole object is called ospan and it's got my init function and it's got all my settings and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I always just at the top of all of my functions, I just say like var me is equal to this. And then if I ever, run a timer, I can say me start real task. So that it's just, okay, this object, run this function.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got this habit from, have you heard the game Cookie Clicker?
I've heard of Cookie Clicker.
Yeah, it's a JavaScript game. And I looked through the code a bit. And I guess I got a lot of my ideas for handling a very large JavaScript object from looking at that. And he did this. So he would say me is equal to this quite often. And it seemed kind of handy because the rules for this, I think they're not too complicated, but they're complicated enough that I don't understand them.
That's a high bar of complexity that you can understand a collector, which is very complicated at this point. And me is equal to this is beyond your comprehension.
So, I mean, the thing is,
This sounds very metaphysical. You're like, what is me and who is this?
Yeah. It's hard to explain the rules of this. I think I just haven't read enough on it. But
I mean,
for
does it just go
example,
up the sort of inheritance tree until it hits a?
so it's
source
kind
of
of interesting.
perception?
Like, for example, if I have an object that has a function, like, so if say I have a function that's just something like this. I don't know, console dear this, and then console dear hello. This does not refer to the function. It refers to the scope that this function is. So then if later I have an object that is like my object, and then it's like,
Oh, you don't even have to say it's equal to a function. You can just do the brackets and it knows.
yeah, well, brackets means make it an object. Like this isn't, I'm making my object as an object, and then it could say hello. And what this,
that's right, because there's no explicit like new class of.
Actually, I don't want to do this inside my OSPAN code. Let's do it over here. My dumping ground for pseudocode here. Okay, so I think in this case, this, when my object calls say hello, this should refer to my object.
Mm-hmm.
But then if I say, like I think I can do something like my func is equal to new
Func.
say hello. I think you can do that. And that would make this refer to my func. And then it gets weirder when I do something like, if I have, I have a helper function. That somehow acts this, and then if I have another object, and then this says, go find that other object and call its helper function. I am not sure. I think in this case, because this is inside my object, that the console dir for this is actually going to hit this. Like it would return this property. So if this has some property in it, like name, and then here we've got, if I want to somehow run the helper function using the name Tim, I think what I can do is say, var me, I guess, is the consistent thing that I do. So var me is equal to this. And then in here, I can say console dir me. And because I'm not overwriting me inside this one, it should look up into this scope. And this me got assigned to object 2. So now it should be able to find the name as Tim.
Mm-hmm. So
that's why I'm doing this me thing. Because then it says, okay, no matter what, when I ask for me, I'm going to be looking at object 2. And then helper function just says, okay, well, whatever is calling me, I don't care how helper function was defined. I just want to know.
Although, so the myobj, the first one on line 18, doesn't have a me equals this. Is that a problem?
So yeah, if you just called helper function in this one, you would break. So then, I don't know, you could do other stuff. You could just say, like, every time that I'm going to, like, maybe in this case, he's supposed to call it, he runs helper function himself. So helper function isn't meant to be called outside the scope of one of these objects, but then he would still go, me is equal to this. And then helper function now can be used with my object data or my object 2 data. So I'm not an expert at this. Like, this is just me kind of trying to go with what works. It would be nice if we had a JavaScript expert or Adam was here and just could explain what's appropriate. I'm just using this and it seems to be working because, I mean, with my OSPAN, for example, I would have tasks that say, like, set a timeout, and then I want to run this other function. So like running collector timer, but then I want to switch back into the OSPAN object. So I could have just typed in OSPAN every time, but I didn't know what the benefits or the downsides of any of that were. So I sort of just have everything say me, which it wouldn't work if I had 2 objects that were constantly calling themselves me. That would defeat the purpose.
Yeah, who's me? We're all me.
Yeah. So I guess it'd be good if we could get some JavaScript expert, or I think I can just read more up on it later today.
But I mean, it would be good to just find somebody who knows a lot of JavaScript.
Hmm. Yeah, so JavaScript is a weird language. Like the fact that you can do that, my func is like you can save a func. I think you can do this. I'm not sure. This might not even work, but there are cases where you want to store sort of static information on a function. Like how many times have I called this function? And then you could do something like this counter, but on just say hello, there is no this that refers to say hello. But then if you save it as like an object, so like this is like a new object that runs this, and then if I call my func, it should have this internal counter that's running.
Because the object myfunc has, you can init a this.counter.
Yeah, I mean, init is just like a keyword that I do. You could have this just, start up. Like init is not some magic keyword.
Okay, so it's not like PHP, like the construct.
No. So yeah, JavaScript's a weird language. I don't really have a handle on the peculiarities of it. I just am going with something that works. So,
Although you know a lot more than I do, because just looking at your code, I couldn't have written this thing in JavaScript. I should have taken a lot more time of like researching what the hell it's up to.
Yeah, I have done I mean, yeah, I can do everything that I want. It's more a matter of if I don't know if I'm doing it in the sort of correct way, in the sense of, am I going to run into a lot of trouble when I find myself wanting to create two objects? But I see that we do that in
stuff I wonder about lots of times. Like, okay, I couldn't handle the idea of what I'm doing here, but is this going to really screw me if I try to make it bigger? Like, is the solution I'm taking not going to be a good long-term solution? And I don't know nearly enough to make that determination.
Which I guess just comes with experience, but if we could borrow someone else's experience to point out obvious flaws, that would be helpful.
Yeah, stealing experience sounds like a good idea every time. Classic strategy. I could learn this, or someone else could do it.
Which I guess is how I justify my job, because anyone could learn programming. The fact that they'd rather go with the easy route of paying me to do it is great for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great for all of us. Like, this is, to me, the big thing in the field is like, this just makes a lot of people's work easier. Like, you don't have to pay for something, and it does most of what you want to do. You might have to learn programming here or there. Or I think ideally what I want to do, so I have told you about this a few times and I keep forgetting to do it. But what I want to do is make a quick 5-minute video to be like, okay, you want to do some coding things. You don't know how to do code. But if you find a friend who knows, like any web developer, basically, tell them to watch this video, and this will give them all the information they really need to build a trial type. Like, just explain to them, okay, here's what's actually happening on your trial type. When you go to run one, we have this forum, and it's got an ID of content. This is its default things you can override. We don't style content, so if you style the ID itself, it will override our more general styling. Here's what's available to you. Here's how timers work. Here's how you can do things when the trial begins. You just write trial begin equals function and then define all those functions. And we handle lining that up with when the trial's loaded. We handle caching of stuff. Like, we handle most of the work. Here's what you need to know. You have a display.php file. You fill it with HTML and PHP. You can write JavaScript in there if you want. If you want separate, a JavaScript file will be called script.js. They go in this folder, and we handle everything else. Like, if you want to submit things, as long as there's an input on the screen, not called response, first key, last key, RT key, I think. Well, whatever. We can look up which ones we have. But like, don't overwrite these values. These are the names we're already using. Aside from that, you can make any names. We'll record anything that has a named value that's unique. We're going to record its value on the next screen. And if you want to do custom scoring, here's how you do that. Like, make a file called copy this scoring.php file, and now you can do whatever you want with PHP in here.
Yeah. And it seems like enforcing a consistent structure, even when it's unnecessary, is helpful. Like the fact that all of our trial types are now folders, even though some of them could have been just the one file, probably makes it easier to explain. Like, oh yeah, you get a folder per trial type. That's it.
And then you can just look and show like, oh, sometimes the folders are more complex, and open up like one that has everything.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them are just like, like word pair is a stupid simple one. You just look and it's like, okay, it's a div. You can see we put the Q on the left, target on the right, colon in the middle. If they want to make it a dash or a plus, you can imagine how you'd make that possible.
Mm-hmm. And probably, I mean, what we could do
And
is
then with the
once
GUI,
we've
that'll be nice.
and once we
Trial
figured
builder.
out how we want to document our trial types, we could actually just put the comments at the top of every single trial type of like,
Oh,
okay, here's just explaining the scope of where you're at. You're inside of a form, and you have these variables from the stimuli and procedure file, and they're all, lowercase underscored. And you can just put that at the top of every display file because it doesn't hurt us. And then whenever they're looking at a trial type, they can get a hint of what's going on.
yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Did you see? I mean, did you get enough time to look at that JavaScript collector focus prep thing I was showing?
Wait, which focus prep thing?
Like to store the focus prep into.
Oh yeah. So I saw it, but I mean, if you have it, I would say you should just submit it. Or are you not on a branch that's on Git?
I mean, I can do that right after the
Okay.
call today. So yeah, it's just a matter of. I mean, it's one of those things that it would be nice to get someone else's opinion on, even if this works. Is this the
Yeah,
most
it's just how
appropriate
people
way to
talk
solve
about
it? But I'll just make sure it works, and then I'll put that in.
And I would say you don't even really need to test. What we really need to do is make like a checklist of things to check. And when we, before we have releases, be like, let's walk down this checklist and make sure all these things happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I think so. Have you been looking at the demos? They're actually like happening. So we have now audio, caption pick, copy word pair, delayed, queued recall, or queued recall, queue pick, digit span, passages, free recall, instruct, Likert, multiple choice, font size, multiple choice pick, survey, YouTube, and queued recall pick they all have demos now.
Nice. What's this everything one?
So
Nice.
I think the plan is at the end we want one trial that does everything. So
Mm-hmm.
like what we used to be condition 11 that we would always check.
Yeah,
Or was
it
it
was a
10?
shame that we didn't have that.
Yeah. So
It'd
I
also
think
be cool if our demos. We should have some demos of like extravagant stuff just to prove that we can do it. Like here's some really elaborate surveys that someone put a lot of work into. Here's OSPAN and digit span.
yeah.
Tasks that you wouldn't normally like. Not ones that you're building, but just look at these really cool things that we have that already exist.
Yeah, like the kind of puzzle piece approach. I think what was it, SciTurk? Were they the ones who had like the tape deck analogy?
Yeah, maybe I think so.
Like that would be cool, but as like trial types. Like if I could just call an OSPAN in the middle and be like, okay, well this takes about this long. It gives you back this type of output. But if you want to ask an OSPAN, you don't need to know anything about OSPAN. You just write OSPAN. And then that trial type does it for you. So we can have the same benefits of that, like, oh, these are Lego building blocks that you plug together,
Mm-hmm.
which I think for most of this experiments I want to run would not be appropriate, which is why I didn't generally like that approach that SciTurk was taking. But I think for stuff like, okay, well, I've carefully designed my task, but I also want to use OSPAN as a covariate.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know crap about OSPAN, but if it's just in there and you're like, well, this is based on this paper, which is published, and everyone uses this version of the OSPAN, and we basically coded from E prime into the same thing in Collector, then I go, cool, run an OSPAN, then do my task. And it'd be nice to have like common pieces like that people want, especially like working memory type measurements or common measures of like whatever, like surveys. Like everyone uses this survey measure for sociability. Therefore, if you think for some reason sociability is related to your task, you can just do the whole task and at the end give that sociability survey questionnaire.
Yeah, surveys, being able to share those files should be pretty nice.
And then hopefully really quickly we build up like a nice bank of surveys to use.
Mm-hmm. Just another note, but I was looking at these files, and it's cool that Git can show CSVs. I don't know if they can with Excel files, but cool that I can so easily look at all the different files.
Oh, I didn't realize Git. Is that a new thing? Has it always done that?
I think it's always done that. I don't know if it's always formatted it this nicely, but it's nicely formatted.
Yeah, that is like actually like a spreadsheet. Usually I'm used to looking at raw text editor reads of the collector file. You
Yeah,
just see a
commas
sequence of
and stuff.
commas.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be like Mikey.jpg, then 7 commas afterwards.
Oh, and did you see there was a commit from Michael Evans
Mhm.
that fixed MC pick?
Oh yeah, I saw that. So what was wrong with it? I saw it went from an I to an I-2 somewhere.
Yeah, so we used to have padding in our stem files, and then I guess we took that out. So I guess it's probably in there now. Let's see,
Yeah,
multiple
I see it.
choice
It
pick.
went in there 15 hours ago.
Are you just like accepting the pull requests? Um,
I mean, for the most part, I'm kind of looking at what they're doing, but I remember you told me that you talked to him and he
yeah,
found a bug, and I was like, okay, well, Tyson knows that this is working, and I figured it had something to do with padding,
yeah, it was
but I
just
didn't
this
really
part.
look into where it
Yeah,
was
because
happening.
we'll get an item value that says like 2, but that actually means get
Mhm.
the first stimuli, which is index 0. So it's just doing that.
Hmm.
You can still get weird errors, like if you typed this wrong, where you said that, oh, I want, like if your item column had a letter, then you're going to get like that thing that says, oh, undefined index. But I didn't bother fixing that because I don't know. On the one hand, like if you get that error message, it's not going to make sense. Like you're not going to realize, oh, I made a typo and I meant to click 2, but somehow my finger was a row down and I clicked W and now
Yeah.
it's breaking. But I don't know. Maybe that's something the validator can take care of if I work on that.
And I think we should look again. So I'm trying to see. So Caleb had that same problem we've had before, where session just seems to disappear. Is it possible that maybe it's people who are opening like 2 windows at once? Let's say, you
Yeah, I think
like
that,
I
I
have
mean,
this habit where I like right click on things to open links, like I'll do that later. And then I
mhm.
just forget and I open it again, and maybe they have it running in the background and
Yeah, I mean,
something auto refreshes
I know that
and then
happens a lot with people in the lab. Like RAs come to me with that problem, and I see that they've got 3 experiments lined up, and I'm like, oh yeah, you can't have these 2 running simultaneously.
yeah.
So I think probably the solution is let's not wipe session on index. Let's wipe it on login because if they type in a username and click enter, clearly they're meaning to start over.
Yeah, like that
Um,
is a clear sign of intent. Like I want to not be doing what I was doing and now I'm doing this.
yeah, so I don't think you don't need to wipe sessions either at done.php
It also looks
or
like we're wiping it on initiate collector. So I typed in $_session equals because I remember we used to just say equals array
mm-hmm.
because it was better than unsetting. I
uh-huh.
forgot why.
Just like you mean session destroy? Yeah,
Um,
session
yeah,
destroy does nothing. I'm not really sure that function. Yeah, if you want to actually clear out the data, you have to set the array to empty. It's weird. I'm not really sure
yeah.
why that works that way.
So here's what I found. So when I did that for the whole project, so we get it at index, which we know is already happening. So you would say just turn this off and see what happens because I like why did we put that there?
I think it was we were
Was
like
it just a
overzealous.
safeguard?
I think we were just doing it at too many places before. The reason that I have it at initiate collector um, is specifically I didn't want people bouncing between different um,
Hmm.
branches. So like if you're in my branch doing one of my experiments and then they switch over to yours, I don't want Pathfinder looking at the same code because I mean what if we're on different versions of the collector and I don't want it saying, oh yeah, you logged into Tyson's because you know Tyson's password,
Yeah,
and
keep
then
that session alive.
yeah, and then the session just says that you're an admin. So then you switch over to Mikey's and like, oh, you're an admin. I don't need to ask you for a password.
I remember you. Sure, you can look at
Yeah,
all these files.
you have a nice badge that says admin. Go for it.
Okay,
Um,
so this one's less likely to be the root because they're conditionals that are happening.
yeah, because this one is saying like it's taking the URL and it's saying like, are you the same collector URL? Like, are you cogfog/mg/paintings1? And then that part's the same whether you're in code, whether you're in tools. It just takes the root folder and just
Yeah,
says, are we the same root folder? And if not, that means we've switched from Mikey's branch to Tyson's. We need to start over because this is different code entirely. So this part I think we would keep.
yeah. So
Just
this one makes sense.
and then it also says like if I was in Tyson Tools Shuffle Tester and I switched over to Mikey Tools Shuffle Tester, And this says, okay, we just realized that we had to wipe session. If they're inside code, like they tried to switch from done and they're not at login, don't go to Mikey's, like don't stay on Mikey's done page. Like he shouldn't be going to done. Send him back to index and he can log in if he wants to start over. So that's why I'm doing this redirect here.
Would this solve anything? So there's a way to be like, well, something weird happened, but we're not going to completely toss it.
So
like, if this happened, we can save whatever you have and then clear out session and then just put it back in some holder of like, this is old crap. We're not sure why you have it. We don't access it, but we can hang on to it.
You can do that. It seems like
it wouldn't hurt anything. It would just be weird. We'd know, and okay, they tried to switch because look, we have a session old, which has an entire session from a different root folder.
Yeah, I mean, presumably, if someone did like 12 experiments, you might start ballooning that, but I don't think that'll happen too often. So I don't know if that would even be worth doing.
Or we could just make it a counter.
Yeah, because I think I actually mentioned it to you before, but the other thing that you can do is have all of all of the global data that we're trying to write. We could just say that, something like, oops. So I get current collector, right? And that ends up being like cogfog.com/mg/collector, whatever your root URL is. Mm-hmm. And then we could just say something like, gosh, I always forget, is it ampersand equal or equal ampersand?
I think it's ampersand equal.
So if we do this, oops. Then we always just write data to collector.
Oh.
And then it always, whether you're bouncing back and forth between your branch and my branch, they are totally independent. And that way someone actually could set up the indexes of all the experiments they want participants to do, and there would be no interference, because we always say only interact with the session subarray that is relevant to, MG collector. Don't even look at any of the TK collector information.
Yeah.
We could do that. I actually like this strategy. I mean, we're still going to have the idea that data might balloon out, but we're not storing that much in session, and we can get a little bit more careful about if we do reach done, go ahead and clear the session, like at least clear most of the data. Like you can go ahead and clear the procedure and the stimuli and the responses information. You can keep their username and their verification code, I suppose. But this sort of a strategy, we'd have to go through and rewrite a couple of pages, but it would, I mean, on the one hand, we wouldn't have to wipe data nearly as much, and we probably wouldn't lose data as often. And then if we ever get to the point where we're loading up a page and we find that session is empty, or even just this collector session is empty, just go ahead and redirect them back to index. Like wherever you are, you haven't been to here before, and you shouldn't be going directly to a page. I've lost your data for some reason, so you're going to have to log back in. But yeah, so one is we can stop wiping data so often, but it does happen. Like it just seems like sometimes sessions get lost, whether like they got a new IP address or something, or
actually, have we ever just looked up like where do sessions go?
Yeah, I don't know. I think PHP by default writes them to some local branch, but you can override it and say that your session temp files, I think you can tell it where you want it to be. And then what we could do is put those inside the collector branch. So like we could write all of our session files into the actual collector folder. And then if we can write it to a file name that's like, well, I guess it would just be their PHP session ID. But we could have a map of like, okay, this username and ID combination pointed to that PHP session ID. So if someone logs in and they don't have a session, send them back to index, have them log in, look up that username, combine it with their last thing, and ask if they just want to jump back into an old session. Mm-hmm. And then that that should solve that problem. I mean, it's not good that we lost their data in the first place. The other strategy that we could do that actually I did with the conductor, in that the conductor doesn't use session information at all, because I was tired of these session errors, and I didn't really trust it. So actually what I do is on every single page, it submits the username, and then there is a local file that says, okay, this username's local data is this at this current point, and I just load it from a JSON every time.
Huh.
And
that's not slower, or you didn't notice it?
It's not noticeably slower for one person testing on a local host, no. It's probably a bit slower for 1,000 people on a server, but it's also impossible to get a session error because I don't use sessions.
That is nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, pros and cons, because the fact that you can write anything into session is handy for some people, but then you rely on session being always available, and we do know that it's not always available, whether it's just because they clear their browser history, or they accidentally close their browser, or their PHP IP address refreshed, or whatever.
Or Apache does whatever it does that makes session disappear, which we're still not sure of.
Yeah, because I think it's probabilistic. Like, it just says, if they haven't used it for a while, randomly check if we should delete it, and then that seems to happen. So, yeah, I don't really get it. I've tried looking at this error, and there never seems to be a clear solution, which is why I made Conductor not use sessions. This is like a group discussion thing. We don't have the group to discuss it, but it is something that I'm interested in the idea of not using a session, because if we could figure out how to solve session, that seems like the best strategy, because then session should be pretty quick. I mean, I assume that, Apache or any server has been optimized to read these files fairly quickly, but what they should be, I think they're just going to be, PHP serialize of the session variable, and it just loads it up on the start. So it's not, you're still writing to a file and you're reading from a file. It's not like PHP memcache that you're actually storing it in memory.
Yeah.
And it's true that we have a lot of, more data than I guess we would have initially expected, considering we have all the stimuli and procedure and the conditions information. Surveys we store just for that trial, but we are storing a bit of information into session. But I don't think that we would suffer too much if we... Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea to try, unless someone else has more information. But switching to a manual read-write system, considering we can do it at initiate, and it doesn't have to be some big burden on all the files later.
Yeah. I wish we knew why session was doing this, but it does seem like you're saying it's just probabilistic. Sometimes it does it, and there doesn't seem to be a clear case of like, oh, whenever you do X, session disappears. It's just kind of like, yeah, we don't know. We ran 100 people, and 2 people said this happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping some of it is going to go down with the index thing. Like, I think if we get rid of the wiping of session at index, I'm hoping that can explain at least some of the people doing this. Because it should be. Like, there's got to be some people who open up 2 windows, or, they just sort of idly are clicking around, and they open, the same experiment link, and then we wipe session, which is bad.
Yeah. So inside every form that we submit, it is pretty easy to just append a username and an ID element. And I guess technically that makes it possible to get like a man in the middle sort of a thing, but
we've never had a protection against man in the middle. When you're HTTP in the clear, that's always just a worry. You don't know who you're talking to.
Yeah, and then since we never, other than the ID is unique, and we don't even tell them what their ID is. So the fact that they would have their ID now is still not a huge concern.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I guess it goes into their verification code.
Even thinking about it, like if someone uses their username and say the username is Tyson1, or I'm using my email address, right? If someone else knows my email address, they can type in, my email address and get into session 2, So
Yeah.
like if we start off with session 2, it's like, oh, welcome back. Here's all of your private confidential information. Do you want to confirm all that? Like that would be dumb on our part. We're
Yeah.
not protecting against that anyways. If we want to do something like that, we'd have an actual login process with a password. Better just keep things anonymous. Only ask for like, mturk worker ID or some,
Yeah, something non-personally identifiable.
Yeah. So yeah, I
Because
think.
for us, all we really care is that we just want to make sure we can uniquely identify your data amongst everyone else's data, but we don't care who you are specifically.
Mhm. And then at least using WAMP on local testing, doing checks that are like is file checks, those are really quick. So if on every page we submit an entry that's, post username is equal to their username, and then we just had some code that looked like so then we'd go username. Or I guess we would call it .php. And then, well, no, we would go PHP sesh. Let's do that. And then, how do you unserialize? Is it just
Just
unserialized?
unserialized, yeah.
But then,
Seems like it should be trickier, but it is not.
something like that. And then,
But user file, okay, if it is a file,
then
oh,
just
I get what you're doing, just unserializing it.
yeah, and then we'd write some other function to help them through the login process. And then rather than using session, we just use collector. And I mean, this is file check, is super quick. And since usernames, I mean, I guess you could try and spam someone with like thousands and thousands of usernames, but we could have some checking on our own server that like if a user
Rate limit.
or just something like if the mod time, like every once in a while do a scan of all the users, and if their mod time is over 2 hours, then delete them. So
Yeah, it's like
or
garbage
just
collection.
and then just add that username to some like bigger file. Because I mean, one thing is when you have a ton of files that have no information on them, just because of like the minimum file size, you kind of waste a lot of space, and it also takes forever to transfer that information onto a USB because every file has to like, get its own reserve space on the flash drive and all that.
Yeah.
So like the downside of having files is that hundreds of small files is inefficient in terms of transferring data between devices, but they're really quick to look up. So in terms of performance, this is pretty quick. Like I like doing is file checks. They're a lot better than doing like get from file, go through all the rows, find a match for this guy, and then unserialize the second column of their row. Plus, when you're done, you can just say like if you want to empty the file, you can just do file put contents user file and an empty string. Or if you want to just unlink it, you can just do unlink user file.
So file put contents defaults to the kind of overriding behavior. What is it? Is it R? Or no, W?
Yeah, actually, can you do appending with file put contents?
I don't know if you can. I know you can with what is it? Yeah, you can, right? Don't you have the same modes? Is it like W plus?
Oh yeah, you can append. That's cool. Yeah, so just as a third parameter, you can do file append, which you wouldn't in this case because the point is to empty it out. But yeah, you could do that.
Okay. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to entertain like how much time savings or how much better would this be because I know those session errors are really annoying and they're super hard to track down.
Mm-hmm.
Like most other bugs, we can generally fix them in an hour or two of being like, what the hell's going on? Oh, and then we find an error. But these session bugs, there doesn't seem to be one root cause that we can clearly identify.
Mm-hmm.
It's like every time we just sort of look and we end up with a guess, but we never really end up sure of what actually happened, which is really annoying to tell people. They're like, well, what went wrong? And we're like, well, we don't know. Like, this just happens sometimes and it's annoying
Mm-hmm.
and we don't really have a good solution for it. So this would be a good solution.
Yeah, I wonder, is it possible to register any variable as a super global? I don't think it is, but that means that if we want to use a collector, inside of our functions, things like, how we record data by just asking for session position and we get all that information out of it.
Yeah.
Right now, we just have to start off with global collector, which seems fine. I mean, not a
But I
huge.
thought there was a way to make a super global. I know you can't overwrite super globals, but I thought you could make super globals. EP make super global variables. Stack Overflow. Static class variables can be referenced globally.
Yeah.
Oh, but then they have to reference them with the sort of class name double colon variable name.
So this guy says that you have to install an extension.
Oh, so not for us then. Yeah, that's the annoying thing. Like sometimes on Stack Overflow, I'm trying to explain to people what I want, and they're like, "Oh, just go and like change this in your php.ini file, and then recompile PHP." And I'm like, "No, this is not like that solution's not going to work for our case." And people are just like, "Well, why don't you just do that?" It's like it's hard to explain, but generally we're trying to just make this as plug and play as possible. And if one of the steps is recompile PHP, no one will use it.
Yeah, I mean, just doing this global collector thing is fine because inside the functions that need to do this, those are going to be functions that you or I are writing, and we're aware of this.
Like no one's going to be in the dark using global collector.
Yeah. So, yeah, these group discussions, we need a group. I would have loved to get Adam's feedback on some of this stuff.
We can tell Adam to watch us later and be like, tell us what to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Let me move some stuff here. So I'm trying to see what I have to show you. I'm just probably end up being like a summary of a bunch of commits.
Oh yeah, man, I've been talking for an hour and 45 minutes on my random ideas.
No, this is good. I think like we've been needing this.
How was your meeting with the Mozilla group?
Oh, pretty good. I mean, kind of standard. Like, we talked about things here and there, open source stuff. I was asking more questions about like how do we be more effective in getting people on our team and getting a lot out of the team, which I think actually I've been doing better recently.
Cool.
I think a lot of it was just I have to learn to be less handholdy, which is kind of the point they kept making. They're like, yeah, you have to just learn to let go of controlling every piece of code and every decision that gets made, because they're like, if you do that, your collaborators just won't do anything because they're just basically know that, well, you want to make the decision on this. So if I'm not there, nothing gets done.
Well, also, I mean,
just the purpose of having collaborators.
Yeah, but also, I mean, I guess it depends on whether you're talking about code that Adam or Anthony or I are doing versus like the RAs. Like the RAs just needed to have stuff assigned to them.
Yeah, that's more what I meant in that case. Like they just need very clear, like, do this stuff, but I'm not going to tell you exactly what that means. And then a lot of it too was helped by just putting Allison in charge.
Yeah, it was kind of funny.
She was comfortable enough that I could be like, okay, Allison, here's the kind of amorphous task, and I've made a list of all the things I want done, and then you kind of have to explain to people what they need to get done and what they need to know, and that worked out really well.
She's
great.
Doing well.
Yeah, she's awesome. Mm-hmm. So let's see things that happened in. Yeah, it's crazy now that I look 7 days back and there's like 20 commits, which is awesome that everyone like Wednesday afternoon, I sort of sit there and know that I'm going to start getting pull requests. Although starting this Wednesday, they're basically running out of trials to demo. Like I'm looking at this little list. So I made them in the trial types folder is a little list of things. Where's the...
You put the trial begin into the copy word pair delayed.
I put the what?
Did you do... Am I screen sharing right now?
Oh, I think... Yeah, we're both screen sharing, I think. Oh, actually... I'm only screen sharing my chat window or my code window, not my screen.
No.
Okay, so that's better.
Okay.
So what were you saying?
I was looking at one of the commits, and it looks like you switched copy word pair delayed from using window
Yeah.
load. Cool. I didn't know we actually had trial begin, so that's cool.
Yeah, so that's ended up being a little cleaner of a solution. But yeah, trial begin equals function, define whatever you want, and that's it. And so that's designed now that anytime you use trial begin, it syncs up with the sort of collector init. Like collector waits for everything to be loaded and then goes on.
Yeah, I saw the code for trial begin. It just when I was explaining this to Emmanuel, I didn't know whether it was in or not. But so that's why I told him just to use window load, because I was using the old format of collector experiment, which is breaking because we don't have collector defined until the bottom of the page.
Yeah, he told me, he's like, well, it's broken. And I was like, oh, ask Tyson, see if he knows. And then he's like, oh yeah, Tyson knew exactly what was wrong. I didn't even check at it. I mean, I remember you modified this last time, so I was like, okay, ask Tyson, he'll know better than anybody.
Yeah, it didn't take too long to look up, but it is something that you or I would know, but the RAs wouldn't know. So it's good that he came to ask us.
Yeah, which I think is what's good about having everyone there on Wednesday, is that they can ask each other. Like, I can kind of just shoot knowledge at any one of them, and usually they can reconstruct it on Wednesday if they're all sitting in the same room. They can be like, does anyone know how to do this? And someone's like, oh yeah, I asked Mikey that last week, or I asked Tyson. Or they can just walk down the hall to you, which is nice. What else is happening in here? These are mostly, yeah, so that's me changing stuff. Trying to see what are things that are other than just us like making more demos. So anyway, so I updated the version of jQuery. That's nothing. These are all just merges. Let's try begin again. Oh, the thing I did for control files. So I should show you that. But here's what I did. So the error was what? That it was, we were using file exists to find if the files existed case insensitively, right?
No, the problem was that we were not using file exists.
Well, I think initially we are using file exists to check in the conditions file if we can find them. The problem is the control file class is using the literal casing of it.
Yeah. So
So
when
the
we were trying
condition
to
would say,
load
"Oh, I know how to find that," and then the control file would say that file doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah. So let's see. What are we doing? Where are we doing the error checking? Oh, so we have this check conditions file, which is happening in. So what is condition? Condition controller. That's this file. And then I think I was the one that did some of the error checking code down here.
Yeah, I think you did it.
Let's see. Check conditions file. That's this one.
I think condition controller looks like line 618. So if file exists.
Yeah, so this one's using a file exists.
So what I modified the control file to do is to do that same thing. So what we used to do here, so here's a construct of the control file, which is extended by the stimuli class and the procedure class. So this is essentially how we read these files.
I wonder if you and I should have some meeting to discuss the color coding of our language, because yours and mine don't match up. And I think mine is awesome, but it's...
I'm literally just using the default whatever Sublime's giving me. Like, I haven't modified them at all. I think I maybe picked a theme, but aside from that, I didn't do anything further.
No, I did tons of customization on my colors. Like, every single color was at least several minutes of thought.
Oh my god, that's crazy. I literally just like scrolled through them until I found one that looked good. Like, I opened up a page with lots of PHP and HTML on it and clicked around until one looked like pretty good for both, and then I stopped looking. And that was 2 years ago.
I mean, for me, it's like data-y stuff is yellow, so numbers and literal strings are yellow. And then as you push into, double-quoted strings, that's kind of more variable, so it's orange, which is closer to green. And then...
Oh, so you're representing like a continuum of meaning with color.
Sort of. Mainly, I wanted everything to be distinct. So, I mean, these are like yellow-orangey, so they're similar, but there's that important distinction that, like, the orange is potentially variable. And then I've got variables are green, and then functions or, language construct keywords are blue.
Your blue looks more purple to me.
Really? That's
Well, it could be also the compression. Let me see. Yeah, those look pretty purple to me.
That's interesting. We'll have to meet in person and go over it.
Yeah, it could be a color correction thing. But okay, so back to things.
Yeah.
Let's present to everyone. All right, so here's how we're constructing it. So whenever we're making basically a new procedure stem file, we're using the construct from control file.
Mm-hmm.
And so the construct, you're giving it the directory. So you tell it, okay, I'm looking in the stimuli directory. You tell it the file names you want put together because we can stitch files. So it's like, here's the 8 procedure files that I want. And then we pass an error object, which is the error, this little thing we report errors to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this first line is just saying, oh, save that error object in here. And because the objects are all passed by, by reference, right? So even though every object has what looks like a copy of it, it's all pointing to the same error controller.
Yep.
We set the directory. Okay, here's where we explode the file names because we pass in file names as comma separated list of file names. And then we read all the files. So here's where the changes happened. So when we're reading files, we're just saying...
Although I think just going back to the point of objects being passed by reference, like it's not exactly that they're being passed by reference. There are a couple of distinctions. It's practically like they're being passed by reference.
Yeah.
But I think like the distinction would be if, for example, on my screen, if you've got A is equal to 3, and then I do B is a reference to A, and if I change either one, it should change the other one.
Mm-hmm.
But if I go, so if I go A is equal to, or, some object. Gosh, it's been so long. I've been programming so much in JavaScript that I've forgotten how to do PHP. So if I do something like that, and then I go B is equal to A, if I change anything in A, that'll get reflected in B. And same thing if I do B, that'll get reflected A. So it's not, it looks like they're at reference because changing one is going to change the other. But if I say A is equal to 3, B is still going to equal to the error controller. So
wait, why?
So it's B is not equal to A. B is equal to the object of A. I don't know if that makes sense.
It assigns B to point at that object.
So yeah, it's not that B is equal to A. B is equal to the error controller. So if I make A,
B points at what A points at.
Yeah. So if I make A some other thing that's not the error controller, B still exists as that error controller. It doesn't follow A into now being 3.
So B keeps pointing at the error controller.
Yeah. So for example, if instead I did that, then at this point B should equal A. But with that, B is equal to the error controller after this step.
Okay, so that's essentially what I'm doing in here, right? When I'm
yeah. So yeah, like I said, it's practically like they're being passed by reference, but I think
I also just realized I was presenting to everyone, so we were watching my screen the whole time you were explaining that.
Yeah. Well, my explanation is more of an aside.
Okay. So, but it makes sense to me. So what we're actually doing here then is passing in this error object, and we're just assigning a pointer to point towards that object we passed ourselves.
Yeah.
But we don't do any weird reassignment stuff, so it ends up being...
Yeah, we're not recreating the object at all.
Yeah. It ends up being working just like a sort of pointer at that same object that every one of our little login objects is using.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go to read files, here's how we're doing it. So we'd passed in file names, we explode if there's a comma. So if it's a comma separated list of like 5 procedure files, then the files of this object are that list of file names.
Mm-hmm.
And then we say this files as files, so we're going to loop through each of them. So what we were doing before is we just say, well, this is the full path as we add the directory plus the slash and the file name.
Yep.
And then we were checking that it exists. It would just, I think it was called exists. And we would just say this exists, and we'd pass it full path.
Mm-hmm.
And exist, what it was doing, so I can show you what, I changed it to check path because it does a little bit something different now. Where is it? Okay. So don't look at what it's doing now, but what it used to do is it would just take the full path and just do this part. So it use the built-in PHP file exists and say, if this file doesn't exist, we shoot out this error message saying, hey, I looked for that file you sent me to, and it isn't a real file.
Mm-hmm.
But that was bad because the condition controller was checking case insensitively. So if the casing was wrong, the condition controller would say, "Oh, well, I know how to find the procedure file for this thing," and the
Wait, so why
control
are you
file
using
would.
the PHP file exists first? Like, why bother with that first conditional?
I guess it's technically faster.
So the thing,
Although, did you build in the optimizations that's not necessary?
yeah, so my file exists will first check for just an is file of that file.
Mhm.
So if I can find it, like if I'm on a Windows operating system that already doesn't care about casing, it'll check, is this thing a file? Yes, okay, return the path, no questions asked.
Mhm.
So your check is a little, I mean, technically, yeah, you would turn 2 function calls into 1, but that's probably not a very important. I mean, it's also fine that it's in there because it's not like it's slowing us down, but
Yeah.
just the way that file exists work, it's not always splitting apart the path and checking everything individually. It starts with as
So
many
it does
efficiency.
this essentially. It's doing the optimization I'm trying to do is already built into file exists.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, the main reason I did it like this because I figured, well, if the path is correct, this would be faster,
Mhm.
and then I just returned the thing they gave me because over here, what I'm doing is I'm initiating a new variable, and then I'm running the file exists. So basically, what I say is, well, if I fail to literally find the exact casing, then try to find it using your thing because yours returns the casing.
Yeah. And one thing, just this is me
Uh,
being over performance aware,
Yeah.
but is file is faster than file exists because file exists will return true for a directory, and we're not checking for a directory here, so just use is file.
There we go. We'll be in a commit today. So yeah, so this is the file. It returns the literal path, which just means like we're done.
Mm-hmm.
And the other case, I make a variable, run it through yours, and then check is that false because yours will return false when we fail to find it case insensitively. So in that case, we really have failed. Throw an error at them.
Correct.
But if that isn't false, then I'm going to return whatever it got.
Sounds good.
And
why does it end with return true? It should never get to that point.
Oh wait. Okay, so this is the old code.
Okay.
Yeah, it will never get to that point, but
okay, cool.
Yeah,
well,
Adam's
actually, I
old
guess
one just to check. Adam's old exists would just return true, and then he was checking up there if.
I guess actually, in the case where it says if case correct path is equal to false, you're going to throw the error, but that's not actually going to return anything. So.
Oh, does that need to? Does it need to return anything? Couldn't it just run through and do nothing?
Well, what I would do is on that.
Here.
So what I would do is on the else statement, take that out of the else statement and just return case correct path, because if it's false, you're just going to return false, which is a good thing to return. Yeah, so underneath that.
Let me see. How am I using this? Okay.
Because right now it'll just return null, which I guess is a fine thing to return.
So I set full path equal to this check path. But what I also presumed is that. So here's why I didn't really. So you're right that it will return weird things, but it doesn't matter because this error I throw is an error that stops everything.
Okay.
Like if this error is ever hit, it runs an exit.
Okay.
Because I put that. So the second flag in the error thing is this is the flag that says like everything has gone wrong, abandon ship.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I would say that you wouldn't want to depend on that error object. Because what if we change the error object later? We don't want to have to be also thinking about how does control file work.
So should we just throw an exit here?
I guess that would work.
I guess I'm just gonna copy the exact same message.
Oh, I would just exit with the blank. Like you might as well just.
Oh, just be like,
in
this is a worst case scenario. World
in
over.
fact, I would say don't even bother with the exit. Like it doesn't matter if things are breaking by that point because we agree that like it's kind of a game stopping situation.
Yeah, like if I can't find the procedure file you told me you want to use, your experiment doesn't work.
Yeah.
And we should make it really clear early on to people. Like, yeah, there's no way we can correct from this. Like, we would have to guess your experimental design. Like, we're not that good.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm doing. Is I'm just saying, add that case insensitive check, and then instead of just doing a hey, does this thing exist check, I just capture whatever gets returned from this full path thing. Although in that case, now I'm thinking I should have a return for every case, right? Because I am technically saying, well, I'm going to set whatever comes back from there. In this case, I find it. Initially, I give you right back the path. Here, if I fail to get it, I'm going to stop the whole program. Otherwise, I'm going to return the corrected case. So this should cover everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're good.
Yeah.
So that's all I did there.
Cool. Cool.
But now those errors should go away, so that's nice.
Yeah.
Anything else? No, the rest of these are just demos, lots of merging stuff. I think what we should do. Oh, yeah, here's the delay copy. So that's the initial fix he did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think sometime this week we should get together and like start setting. Okay, what do they do next? Because they're about to run out of trial types to demo.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones, so I made them this little list I can show you here. So initially I had like numbers on all of these, but these X's means that these are now done actually. So X's should be there. So here's what's happening. I just listed, okay, these are the trial types. If they have an X, that means they now have demos. I put numbers here for the priorities. So word pair needs one, new session, queued recall pick, JOL, multiple choice pick. And then these, I told them to wait on them because I don't know if they're ready to be demoed. Like video, is that going to change again? I can't remember the last time we did anything with it or used it much. But like, can we have people demo it now? Like, are things going to change in the next week or so, or I guess in the future?
I would expect not. And like, for example, attention check might change to use my side data class, which is part of the get data commit, but yeah. I'll take care of those changes and it'll function exactly the same.
But so attention check, I told them to wait because right now it just like it doesn't work like almost any of the other trials, and that there's no real. It doesn't look for inputs. It's just gonna run exactly what's on that page. So it is very much a stand-in for what used to be instruct.php. So here's the display file, and it's like full out, just a bunch of HTML with embedded JavaScript.
I mean, I think you could take the.
Like, how much of this can we abstract into?
Yeah, I would abstract away the actual instructions, like the paragraph
stuff.
Yeah, that stuff, and then the buttons as well, and the question. And so you could do that like first text entry is the instructions, second text entry is the question. Inside settings, you've got correct is equal to this, and alternatives are equal to these.
Okay, so then it's going to be like a list of, let's see, I guess I can just write it out. Prompt, question, correct.
Well, I would do correct and alternatives inside settings, but prompt and question inside text.
Okay, so these are...
Yeah.
That's enough. And then we're going to go correct. Or do we have a count on the lures? I guess we can just...
Yeah, as many lures as you want. You could even have 0 lures for all we care.
It's a very easy attention check.
So I would actually, I mean, let's start standardizing how we use settings, and then I'll make a function that turns settings into an array. But let's go with long form settings. So it's like settings should look like something like this.
I'm going back to
am I still? Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to present you to everyone so it records your screen this time. Okay.
So we can do something like correct, equal, stuff doesn't matter, and then probably the pipe character, lures.
Yeah, pipe is good because we've standardized that for everyone. So if we can keep people on pipes, that's ideal.
So, but pipe is for in between different settings, and then I guess in between the values of a specific setting, we'll do a semicolon. That seems. Although I guess actually that part I won't check myself. Like they can do that on their own end.
Wait, what do you mean they can do that on their own end?
Like, so I'll make a function that returns something that's like this.
So we're just going to give the literal text?
Yeah, and then I guess they can explode lures.
Although I think if we're going to do this, we should explode it for them. Like, I mean, right? If we're going to tell them that it could be multiple
you
things.
don't think there's a situation where they'd want to have semicolon as some value?
What do you mean as some value?
Like, what if they wanted to say lures, like one of the lures that they have, or for some trial type they have, one of the settings involves a semicolon. Like, I don't know why. Like,
yeah, some complex sentence construction.
Yeah, it's like...
I mean, could we find another character that would work as a second level separator? We could do 2 pipes.
Yeah, could do, but...
Then replace double pipes with some weird...
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That might be too much work. Trying to look at my keyboard.
Yeah. I guess we could do the backtick.
Although that's a character that's hard to explain to people.
Yeah. And it's good to stick with the basic ASCII stuff. Could do what we
double
could do.
colon we've used before, but I don't know how standardized that is.
If we say that you start with a bracket, I'll turn it into an array. What do you think?
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
And then I'll take care of like trimming around the beginning and end. So I have that remove label. That would also check for plurals. Like it was the case where I would say something like, if I didn't care if they typed answer or answers, actually check for plural, but that's not necessary. So that's like too much work on our end.
Yeah, it's much easier to just tell them, you know, if we have a page at clear list, correct equals, like, and show them basically something like this. It's like, it should be obvious.
And probably I'll also lowercase the keys, because there's no case where I want lowercase correct to be that, and I want uppercase correct to be this stuff. Like, nope.
No, if you do that, we're going to overwrite correct because you're fucking with us.
Yeah. Yeah. Although maybe in this case we should still be doing semicolons.
Yeah, I think so too, because I was thinking like commas, like I know we ran into that with surveys initially. Remember we trying to like use commas and they're way too common.
Wonder if I could do that.
What other characters could we use? Like we want something that doesn't show up in common writing. Like, the pipe is such a good character. It just sucks that we can't keep using it over and over.
No, like, so if I make a parser, then I can say...
yeah, I think the brackets for an array is good, and then just pipes inside of that means, okay, well, within this array, these are the objects.
Yeah. So, and I can probably do some regex to pull this out, and then later put it back in after I've exploded by pipe.
And then that would be nice to just standardize for every trial, like settings before even... I would say before even display, settings equal to whatever that function is, settings. So we'll parse it before you even get access to it. And now you always have access to the parsed thing.
Yeah, so I'll work on some function that knows how to parse things that are bracketed and piped.
So is that the thing we want to standardize for everything then? Just brackets and pipes? Because that looks nice to me. Like I'm trying to find a case in my head that wouldn't work. And I don't think I can think of any.
One thing is this would turn lures into an array that is not associative. Like we'd actually end up with this case. Yeah, we're just going to get... And is that fine? Because, I mean, that seems like it should be fine. But then
like for each.
It extends up to the top level that then you could have, like, since there's no equal sign in this part, then you'd end up getting some value over here. Well, I mean, I guess this would be 0. Is that? I don't know if that makes sense.
Wait. So you're saying if there's no equals, then do we just...
Because that's what's happening here. Like, it's not saying like this is equal to 1, that is equal to 2. It's just I'm turning that into this area. So at the
But if you just add things to an array without keys, they start out 0 indexed, right? So
yeah,
this is technically lure 0.
yeah. So like this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. But then buttons is the same way. Like this clearly isn't a key because it's not equal to anything. So would I just say? I mean, would that?
I mean, in these cases, I would almost want to do like buttons equals true.
Yeah, I know that would also make sense. But I like the idea of keeping things like, because then you could nest it, and then you could have like other is equal to the.
Oh my god, that's crazy. In that case, I'd be like, you should just write a JSON. Because we don't want to, we want to make it like accessible. Yeah, like we want to find this right balance, right? We want to make it easy enough to input, easy enough to easy enough to get things back from, but not have so many features that it's hard to understand. Like it should be very simple. And I think the initial correct equals something clearly establishes a key of correct and a value of that.
Mhm.
Lures, and then I think the brackets is a nice way to be like, okay, well, we've made an array. Although, what if someone just like, okay, what if instead of buttons there, you just do a bracket?
What do you mean a bracket?
Like you open close bracket and put stuff in there. What would happen? How would you imagine that would parse?
So that would still be like, since I didn't define a key, I'm just going to automatically index it as a number.
Hmm. I wonder if that's the way to go with it. Because so let's think about all the cases we want to use settings. So we either want to do it like correct equals something, like okay, we're going to feed you a series of values. But we also we also I think it'd be nice to have like flags essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Like okay, well I want to, like YouTube, imagine I want it to be like auto submit and I can just do auto submit as a value
And not
in
auto submit
settings.
is equal to true.
Yeah, just like okay, well that's a thing I'm turning on. Like this is a feature I want available.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, I almost want to make settings not an array, but an object that I can ask for stuff. Because
Mm-hmm.
lots of times, like, so instead of having to do all these like is set checks,
All
we
right, then
can
what
just
about?
make the getter smart and be like, okay, if I ask you for buttons and I don't have buttons, I'm going to return false.
So how about we
But
just
if I have
say
buttons, then I can return the
that
values
this
of
is not
buttons.
some infinitely nestable thing. It's just top level stuff are all keys. So that if I put, you know, skip feedback is going to end up as true. So we're going to get.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you got an equal sign, I'm going to make that its value. And then if you give me brackets, I'm going to try and form an array. But in this case, I'm just going to. So the thing is, the simplest case would be like, okay, if I see an opening bracket, go to the closing bracket, which
Mm-hmm.
actually would only go up to here, not up to the second bracket, which is
Oh,
interesting.
yeah.
But I guess we can just say,
We can do
yeah,
like a reverse search, like find the length of the key and now walk backwards until we hit
yeah.
the next closing bracket.
I mean, it's not. I mean, really, the way that you do it is like you go when you hit a bracket, you start a counter that says, "Oh, I'm one bracket in."
Oh,
You hit this one, I'm two brackets in. Okay, I'm one bracket in. Oh, I'm at 0. Okay, this was the entire bracket thing. So you kind of have to just parse it, which is a little slow, but settings is not a big deal. In most cases, they won't have any brackets, so it's not an
yeah.
issue.
So I think doing it this way is good, but I think you should represent it not as an array, but as an object, which basically is just making this array. But we just need a smart getter that if I say settings buttons, it knows to be like, okay, well, I don't have buttons, so return false. Instead of me having to say if is set settings buttons, and then settings buttons is whatever. Like I don't want to have to keep thinking about if these things are set. I just want to ask it, do I have, give me back what I have for correct.
Hmm.
And if I have nothing, give me false, which means, okay, well, you don't have a correct.
Even in that case, it seems like what you could do is say we have some function to parse settings. We could do settings is equal to and then this would be an array.
Oh, so it knows to establish empty keys.
by default, it sets all of these to false, and then it parses this and starts filling it in either as true or as the value or as the array of values.
Sure. I mean, I'm impartial on this solution versus the other.
Okay.
This seems like it might be easier for us to make mistakes because if we add new values, we decide, oh, here's a new setting, and we forget to add as one of the expected values, whatever, buttons 3 or buttons 2. We'd still be able to parse it and get buttons 2 back in the case that it does exist, because this would automatically know, right? Like it's just reading the strings, and whatever it finds, it's going to parse into stuff. Or I guess we could code it to only allow the accepted or the expected things. But I presume good behavior is, well, read whatever we have there and be able to give it back to me. Because maybe, let's imagine I'm modifying a trial type you made, and I don't know about any of this crap, but I'm like, well, I want to add a setting. And I put a check at the very bottom, like, if this new setting is equal to true, then make the background green.
I mean, I think, so maybe the simplest solution is even to skip this, and then like the case you were saying where you just want to see if they've got a flag set, then you just do, if not empty, settings flag. Do something that flag represents, or if it is empty, and throw an error message like, hey, you don't have any buttons for me. And this is also stuff that we could do in the validator.
So this seems to me more complicated than just saying settings buttons, and it says, well, false. You don't have settings buttons.
That seems more complicated than...
I was saying this seems more complicated, having to check if settings exist before I try to use them. Because I'd like to just write, like, if settings buttons, do something. Set this value as buttons, else do something else.
I mean, that's a little bit simpler, but do you think it's...
Well, because this empty thing assumes that you know the structure of settings. And I tend to presume that people aren't going to know how the hell it's working. And I think they're going to treat it more like magic. They're going to treat it like, well, I wrote these settings in, and then I said, give me settings, whatever the thing I wanted. And if they don't understand, like, oh, you have to go a level deeper. Again, but then they'll be programming. Like, I don't know. It's always hard to, like, how much programming do we presume they're able to grapple with? Because, like, empty, it's not obvious what that really means. Like, it's not obvious that empty also checks that a thing exists.
But, I mean, that's the point, though.
Like
it's
empty,
like, this abstracts away, does it exist and is false, or does it just not exist? Because you could also do if is set. And then it's like, oh, okay, so they don't have it flagged. And if they're using settings, they're using PHP. So presumably at this point, they actually do know a little bit of what this stuff is.
But I can imagine people who know a Veronica could probably figure out a really simple, like, settings, arrow, some value. Like, if settings, arrow, value is equal to 5, do this. Then she doesn't have to keep track of, like, because I've seen people do that a lot, where they'll add a flag on one of their trials, right? They'll make, like, another column and call it, extra. And on 5 of the trials, they'll write a little note there, and then they'll check, hey, if that note is this thing, do something. Like, if that note is equal to 5, they'll just add that to the display. And then on the trials where, it's expecting some value, or they want to do, they're trying to do stuff presuming, well, if it doesn't exist, then this will fail. But they're not checking if it's set. They can get weird errors. And that might happen here, where they just, like, add, okay, well, every time a setting comes up, I'm going to check if it's equal to 10. And, half the time that setting doesn't exist because they didn't add it to this line. And the other half the time it's equal to 10. So they'll get errors on half the trials because they won't understand that, well, when you didn't initialize that settings in your string, it causes errors because now we don't know how to access that value. We don't, like, computers don't work like you do, where I say, hey, if he's got a red shirt on, do X, and you just go, well, this guy has no shirt on, that's fine, it's not red. The computer gets confused, but it's like, it doesn't tell me what color shirt is.
Yeah. All right. I mean, I guess for me, just the approach just seems like there's a lot of overhead. Like, I don't like creating objects, but in this, I mean, I guess it'd be a pretty small one, and it would just be
that's what I imagine. Like, real simple. Like, essentially, it'd just be your parse function plus a getter that says, if you try to get a thing that I don't have, I'm going to return false.
Oh,
So then
man.
I can always ask it for any value and it won't break on me. It'll still say like, oh, I can give you something. But the setter or the getter would just say, hey, you've asked me for value. I'm going to look it up. If I don't have it, I'm returning false.
I've forgotten how to use PHP so bad. There we go. Oops.
Yeah, and then all you'd need is a public get, and all the get would do is say, hey, do I have this key? If I don't, return false. Otherwise, return the key. Yeah, and you can, if you do it this way too, you can still access them directly. Like if you build some complicated structure, you're like, well, I know what the hell I'm doing. That's why I didn't like Adam's default stance of make everything private. I'm like, oh, in lots of these classes, unless you have a really good reason this has to be private, I would try to default to public. Because I know there are complicated cases where I just want to be able to get into an object and pull out a value I want directly.
There should be some magic way of when you just do like the arrow get this thing,
Yeah, it's under
public
your
function
underscore
get.
and get, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
So then it's this point.
I'm trying to see where I know I use it in the settings class, which it's gonna be funny. This is gonna be another settings. We can just not tell them that. Yeah, that's pretty much the entirety of the class. And then you just write that function that parses. Although you can probably make it protected because I'd imagine Adam will want to.
Oh yeah, what's the difference between those?
Protected, what was it? You can inherit it. So if I extend your class, I get your inherited function, or I get the protected functions. I can use them. If they're private, I think if I extend the class, I don't get them. Or I can't access them directly. Like, if I run your construct, I technically get the parse settings because it does it,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't overwrite the way parse settings works. Where I think if it's protected, I can write my own parse settings and it will overwrite yours. Or I could just write my own methods that call it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your parse settings is private and I extend settings, it won't allow me to run parse settings because it'll say, well, you didn't get that. I believe that's how it worked. Are there other cases where we're using settings that we haven't standardized it? I know we had this conversation at one point where we're like, we should have one way of doing it because there weren't one. There were like a few different trial types had different solutions. But I can no longer remember what those things were.
Well, probably just every trial type.
Wait, what do you mean every trial type?
Every trial type that uses settings, we've probably been doing it in a little bit like different each way. So it's good to standardize. I think for the most part now we're standardized onto pipes, but like I'm not sure how we're doing Lickers, for example.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up right now. But it would be nice if they all use the same like parser.
Mm-hmm.
Because then we would just have to explain the parser once to people. Like, this is how you put settings, and then we can tell them, okay, well, this class, these are the settings. Like, these are flags. Like, you can set these 5 flags. If you put them there, then that turns a feature on. And these are the 10 things that you can input into. Like, question, lures.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this does require us to teach people the arrow notation, but I think that's easy enough to write a documentation for how to put settings in their trial types.
Hmm.
And we just explain there, okay, well, whatever you put in that settings column, here's how you access it back. Arrow, the thing you want. So in this case, if I called settings lures, I would get back an array, right? An array 0, 1, and 2, and
Yeah.
0 would contain 2, 1 would
Yeah.
contain 3, 2 would contain 4.
Hmm.
So yeah, that seems like the format I kind of would want anyway. It's like, well, in general, I get the way I tell the program how to give me settings, but now I don't want to have to think about it when I want them back. I just want to know, well, I inputted lures, give me lures. And I think people would like the idea of flags instead of having to say, well, this thing is true. You can just say, well, I want that thing on, like auto submit. Or we can there's lots of cases where I would want to modify trial types with these types of flags, like YouTube. So I think we should have a default that's double the size. And it'd be nice to have a setting that just says double size. And then we can tell people, oh, if the video is small, you can say double size. And that will double the size of the video on screen.
Hmm.
Or, there's just tons of trial types I can imagine that I would want to do this with settings. But I've been lazy because I'm like, well, we have to standardize it. But I think if once we have the standard in, it makes it a lot easier.
Hmm. Well,
Although
I'll
this is
finish
going to
this
be
up.
very, yeah, this is going to be very complicated talking to people about settings though, because we just need to not mention that there's also $_ settings, which they
Oh,
generally don't access inside of Experiment. Like that's pretty much all for us now.
yeah.
So I think it's fine enough to tell them, well, this is how you guys get settings
Yeah, we'll just say, yeah, settings is a special
for trials.
thing.
Yeah, like that column that says settings on your trial, we can read values from that in this special way, and here's how you get them back.
I
And they
guess
just
maybe
not
we should call
mention.
this like proc settings and stim settings, because you could conceivably have both.
Oh, that is true.
Or should I just merge those?
Oh, that would be nice if there's so we already don't allow them to have settings in both, so they'd have to name them proc and stim settings.
But then, yeah, I guess if they then had stim settings, they might be expecting this to happen and it won't.
Yeah. Actually, what would happen? So if they put a settings in each file, it defaults to which one? Proc or stim?
I think procedure.
Okay. Well, I guess if they put a settings in both, we'd break at the very login process. We'd tell them you can't have settings twice.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be awesome to merge them. But then we'd have to make a lot of other stuff smarter too, right? We'd have to, one, allow them settings as a column that can overlap. I think right now shuffles are the only ones we allow to do that.
Mm.
And then I guess this class would just have to be smart and be like, okay, well, go to the stimuli and look up settings, parse it. Now go to the procedure and look up settings and add to the currently parsed thing.
Yeah.
If the two are in conflict, we'd have to deal with that, right? Like if
I mean, the other thing is just in the trial type that has another column, presumably they know that they can have that column, so they would just go like stim settings is equal to new settings. Because actually, it would be like this. Oops, not brackets. So, I mean, I guess it's up to the trial builder to specify what things need to be turned into settings, which is, I don't know, I would want to do this step before we actually get to the display.php.
yeah,
But you can,
that's what I was thinking. Like line 27 would be just before display happens. So you always can ask about settings. And if you have none, we just return false for everything you ask for.
yeah. So,
Which I think is a nice default for people who don't understand like is set checks. You can just be like, well, right, if this setting is this thing, do something. Whatever, add this CSS rule. Because half the time I've seen people want something like a settings, it's as simple as that. Like they're just like, well, I want to, check if this is 10 because half of these trials have 10 on them, and if they're 10, then I'm going to make the font bigger. I'm going to whatever, make it bold.
What are we doing? How are we naming our files? Are they like class? Oh no, they're just inside the
Again,
classes
this would be
folder.
a good Atom conversation. Oh my god, it's 10:30. We should end this soon.
It's gonna be a long video.
It is. Let's see. Oh, right now we already have one called settings.php because it's my settings class. Oh god.
So, right, just really quick, if they get into a situation where they've done something like this, should I make the extra effort to parse this correctly or just break?
I would just break. Because, I mean, when would you ever have data like that where lures is equal to something and one of them has sub options that you wouldn't just write your own custom parser for that thing?
Yeah.
Because, right, what I would do would just be like, well, I know one of these is going to get weird, so I'm going to put double exclamation points. And when I get them back, I'm going to look through my lures and find the one with double exclamation points and explode it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, basically go through each setting and be like, okay, if stirpos double exclamation point is not equal to, was it, -1? Like, if I found it, then do my separate thing to parse this one because it's our weird one. Like, if someone's getting that deep, they know what they're doing. No one's going to make a 3-level deep nested array that doesn't understand arrays. Like, I have a feeling most people are going to do like what you have right now. Like, we wrote, these are the settings, and they'll write correct is equal to this thing, pipe lures is equal to that thing, and then maybe they'll turn on a flag, like, you know, whatever we add for different trial types.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the flags idea is really nice because we could just make a list of flags. Like, these are things you can just turn on by listing them in settings.
Yeah.
And you list them with pipes between each one. So it could simplify a lot of trial types in the way we have to specify settings. And it probably we could clean up some of the display files too. Because then we wouldn't have to do so many checks. We can just say, well, settings this value. And if it's, you know, actually we can just do a lot of ternary. Like, we can be super lazy, right?
Well, I'm not sure. What situation are you thinking of?
Like YouTube flags, like those. So YouTube especially
Oh,
is one of those that has lots
yeah.
of settings that could just be turn on or turn off, like autoplay.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, if you don't list autoplay, although I guess in this case we default to on. Although, how do you turn off autoplay? You have to just set autoplay is equal to 0.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure. No, actually, I don't know.
Yeah, because right now I'm looking at the code. It looks like we just say autoplay is 1 and we're not even taking a variable. So we're presuming autoplay, which I think is fine because who the hell would have a trial type where they decide when they get to play it? That seems weird to me. But yeah, I can imagine lots of trial types. Once we have this, we can mess with them.
Okay.
So yeah, so finish this up, and then I say just commit it, and then I'll probably start looking through trial types right now to see who could take advantage of this. And maybe start modifying trial types to be a little bit smarter.
Okay.
And then it would be nice because if we have this one class, we can just write one documentation page on how to input settings. And then on the trials themselves, we can just say, well, these are the settings available to you. If you don't know how to put settings, click this thing, and we can explain to you how settings work.
I just realized that this approach of like just exploding and then imploding, the errors it's going to cause are always going to be caused by dumb user inputs, like someone doing this.
Uh-huh.
I'm just going to make an actual parser that just says, okay, if you are after an equal sign and before a pipe, I'll check for brackets, and I'm going to lump that all together. So I'm going to actually make a parser rather than this really quick but breakable thing.
All right, cool. So work on that. I'll look at trial types and presumably do some other work as well at some point today.
All right, I'll finish up OSPAN as well, and then we can get the RAs to test that. And then are you also going to move the script back to the header?
I think I already did that. I did that yesterday. I'm pretty sure it's back in there now.
Cool.
At some point I did it. Yeah, there it is. 17 hours ago. So I took it out of the footer and it's in the header. And I also, that was the same commit that I updated the jQuery to the newest version. It's the commit name is moving jQuery and
Oh, got it.
collector.js to header. There it is.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I did that yesterday. And it seemed to cause no errors, which is nice. Like I'm always worried when we do these sort of I think initially we moved it and we had a bunch of errors and then we fixed them with kind of hacks. But now it just looks like in the end just put them back.
Although we had jQuery in the header, we had the jQuery UI and Collector.js
Oh,
in
okay.
the footer.
Oh,
Which
it's a
is
jQuery UI.
because I was using jQuery where I was doing window load instead of collector stuff, and that
right.
worked. So we did have jQuery available. Just the UI for sliders wasn't.
Hmm.
All right, cool.
Cool. All right. See you guys then.
See ya.